The UK, Canada, Australia and France are amongst the countries recognising a Palestinian state as the United Nations General Assembly gets underway in New York. What does this mean for the Middle East and for diplomacy around the world? We'll discuss on the latest episode of the BBC's daily news podcast, Newscast. Hello, it's Adam in the Newscast studio. In New York this week, all the countries that are members of the United Nations will be meeting for the regular General Assembly when a whole load of world leaders descend on New York, although it doesn't look like the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer is going this year. One of the big themes is going to be an increasing number of countries recognising a Palestinian state. The UK, Australia, Canada and Portugal have already done it or are about to do it, and a whole load of other countries are going to be doing it as part of a conference organised alongside the UN by the French President Emmanuel Macron. So let's find out what that means and how that fits into the whole jigsaw of the UN General Assembly this week, because two friends of Newscast are there outside the UN HQ in New York. Please welcome Caitriona Perry. Hi, Caitriona.
Hello, how are you?
Good, thanks. And also there is James Landale. Hi, James.
Hey, Adam. How you doing?
Very well, thank you. Now, before we dig into the back and forth that's going to happen in New York this week, James, we've got a very good and very direct question from newscaster Mark that I'm going to put to you. And Mark asks, what does it mean in practice for the UK to recognise a Palestinian state? For example, does it mean we'll have official diplomatic relations, potential trade agreements, etc.? Who would the diplomatic relations actually be with? I.e., who do we recognise as the head of a Palestinian state?
Yeah, all really, really good questions, and there aren't that many good answers to them. Essentially, there will be some technical differences. So, for example, the Palestinian mission in London will, we expect, become a formal embassy. And at the moment, the head of that mission, who's a sort of unofficial representative, we expect, will become a full ambassador. But obviously, there's a sort of diplomatic process that has to be gone through and various sort of procedures before that happens. Where there's slight more uncertainty is what happens to the British Consulate General in East Jerusalem, which has been there for years, and I didn't realise this, but apparently it's been there longer than the existence of the State of Israel. And the question, of course, is does that now become a full embassy? I asked the Foreign Secretary about that last night. And she said at the moment it's going to stay as it is until what she described a diplomatic process began, protocol process with the Palestinian Authority. Clearly there is an issue there. If the British were to rush today to start sticking up large new signs outside the consulate in East Jerusalem saying this is now the embassy, that might be seen as slightly aggressive. And what the British, I think, would want to avoid is an unnecessary row with the Israeli authorities, which involved any kind of UK diplomats being expelled from various parts of the West Bank. So there's a certain amount of sort of sensitivity with all of that. So yeah, it's complicated, and there isn't really a capital or a head of state or contiguous boundaries that are internationally recognised. So what we're seeing here really is the recognition of an idea that such a thing should exist, such a thing could exist if there were to be peace, if it were to be agreed internationally. So we're a long way away from that. And there are huge practical problems because you've got, Gaza is war-torn, the West Bank is increasingly filled with hundreds of thousands of Israeli settlers. So the idea of having, such a thing as a Palestinian state, many people say it's so difficult, it's almost impossible. But so what's happening here is it's a recognition of an idea, and that idea should continue to exist, because there are many Western diplomats say the actions of the Israeli government want to kill even the idea of that happening.
And yeah, James, all those logistical and practical and detailed things, just demonstrate that last point you were making, that to some people this is actually a very symbolic thing. It's sort of a big gesture. To others, it's a means to an end as opposed to the end in itself.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, over the years, the idea of key Western powers and the G7 and elsewhere recognising Palestine was just this huge prize that the Palestinians and Arab supporters have been chasing for a long time. And the British and others always said, look, yeah, we'll do it, we want to do it, but it has to be part of a final settlement. That's all gone. We're now in a different place, and it's essentially trying to preserve this idea that I spoke about, that such a thing as a Palestinian state at some stage in the future should exist. And when you talk to British diplomats and they say, look, yeah, we know this is symbolic, we know this is, it's declarations, it's not going to change a great deal on the ground immediately. But they say, look, if you look at the scale and strength of the Israeli response, the scale of anger, the fact that there is sort of, cross-party opposition to this in Israel, the British and others would say, look, that shows this matters. The Israelis are really concerned about it because what it does is it deepens Israel's global isolation, and the Israeli government doesn't like that.
And Caitriona, where you are in New York this week, more countries will be joining in the recognising.
Exactly, and I was just speaking actually to a member of the Saudi Arabian delegation here, and to James's point, there's this debate about what doesn't matter in a way, that recognition. But he was saying to me, it gives hope. It gives hope to that movement, that push, that more countries are recognising the plight and the fight. And in doing so, ultimately, that's putting pressure on the United States. I mean, the more times that you have President Trump in a situation as he was with Sir Keir Starmer last week being forced to say, I disagree with you on that matter, the more that pressure piles on President Trump. Now, of course, he did say there is no hope in a way to what he said last week, right, saying I'm not going to pressurise Israel until all the hostages are freed. So the road may still be long ahead, but what it does do is create that movement, and I suppose particularly in the EU, the more European Union member states who recognise Palestine, the more likelihood there is that the EU as a bloc kind of officially will recognise it, which hasn't happened yet, despite so many member states doing it. And then that leads into a greater likelihood of a trade embargo and all of these things that could be or would be viewed as straws on the camel's back that may lead to change, that may lead to that ceasefire that seems so elusive as we're standing here talking right now.
And I suppose what makes this week so complicated is the logistics of who's where when. So, for example, James, the head of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, isn't allowed to enter the US. And Caitriona, Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, is not going to be in New York at the same time as Donald Trump.
He's not, but they are having a meeting at the White House next Monday, I understand. So they will have that kind of FaceTime. But I mean, it just shows you the US position on this, doesn't it? Embracing the Israeli Prime Minister into a meeting in the White House next week, but refusing to give a visa to Mahmoud Abbas and many others of the Palestinian delegation to even come here to have talks with the other world leaders. It just shows the level of control that the US has over this situation.
James?
Yeah, look, I mean, I've been here many years, and there have been, cases where the Americans have even blocked Iranians, diplomats who are here, who were severely ill with cancer, leaving the UN bloc so that they could go up to a hospital, get some treatment. And so the rules about who can come and when, are very circumscribed by, the fact that the Americans are the hosts. There was even some discussion about having today's special conference on the two-state solution, Palestinian recognition, in Geneva, so that the Americans couldn't veto the presence of the Palestinians. Obviously that hasn't happened because you just got all the world leaders here. And instead we're expecting the Palestinian leadership to sort of be beamed in remotely. But yeah, it shows that, the Americans, control the shots. The interesting point with all of this with the Americans, though, is I think the White House will be very reluctant for any row over recognition, potentially to start sort of poisoning the well with wider ramifications. If, for example, the Israelis retaliate by, as has been discussed, as some Israelis have asked for, some kind of partial annexation of the West Bank, if that led in any way to the breakdown of the so-called Abraham Accords, all of those deals that normalized relations between Israel and various Arab countries that was agreed under Donald Trump's first term, if there was any sense of threats to that, because Donald Trump sees that as a core part of his legacy, he will not want to upset that particular apple cart. So I think the Israelis are going to be treading carefully here as to see what they can get, what they can get agreement with the Americans.
And James, you just mentioned that phrase, annexing the West Bank. How's that different from occupying the West Bank or occupying parts of the West Bank, as Israel currently does?
In some respects technical, in some respects it's substantively different. One is an army enters somebody else's territory and they just occupy it. And then secondly, a country sends in troops, or controls it in some way, and then formally annexes that territory and claims it as their own, and then gives it a different status. And then, in other words, it's the next phase of that, and it would be seen as incredibly aggressive, effectively, making final the impossibility of a proper, genuine two-state solution with a proper Palestinian state if large chunks of that Palestinian state, not just occupied by Israeli forces, but are actually formally claimed by the Israeli state to be its own contiguous territory. And I think that's why that's quite tricky.
Also, James, will we now hear British government ministers talking about Palestine as opposed to in the past where they've talked about Palestinians or Palestinian people in Gaza?
Whenever I talk to officials about that, they scratch their heads and they're not entirely sure yet. I think they're working this one through. I think the likelihood is that they will, because the UK government now considers the West Bank and elsewhere to be Palestine, so they will call it Palestine. They still might say it's occupied Palestine, but some of the language will change, definitely.
Well, yeah, so I just saw some screen grabs on social media last night of the moment that the Foreign Office travel advice page changed from the occupied Palestinian territories to, say, Palestine. So there's an example of the decision trickling down into practical things, even on .gov.uk. Caitriona, I've never been to a UN General Assembly. Can you give me a sense of what it's like?
I personally love it. It's, I'm a nerd for international politics and how the world works, and I just love the kind of power nexus that you have here, and everyone's dressed in the traditional dress of the country from where they're from. There's great people watching, the size of the entourage as well is really interesting to watch who comes in with just 2 or 3 people and who comes in with 20 walking around them. James and I get to meet. You can't see, but I've got a box here that I'm standing on to because I'm very short to try and keep
level playing
the
field.
Same height. Yeah, so a lot of my day is spent standing on a box, leveling the playing field. Exactly, yeah. And you just, you get a chance. I mean, there's what goes on in an official capacity in the chambers, and very important speeches are made and so on. But it's all around the edges where the real conversations take place. That's where you want to be the little fly on the wall. Who's going into a little pull-aside room with who? What are they talking about? How long does that meeting last for? And just the kind of interplay that happens away from the cameras is fascinating for me in a real nerdy way.
Adam, this is basically the Olympics of diplomacy. You've got the entire world here all crammed in. There's massive security, gridlocked traffic, and that democratizes it, because it means you've got very, very distinguished world leaders who have to join the same queues and through the security, and they're wandering around, and they're all, all the muscled security people are wandering around, and they're clashing with each other. They're clashing with the New York police force. There's an awful lot of people with an awful lot of guns wandering around this place. And everybody's packed in, and that means you can actually wander in. And so, if you go into the canteen in the United Nations, you can be standing there sort of, with your sandwich and your cup of tea, and you'll be standing next to a world leader, or, quite often, I see Gordon Brown in there, the former Prime Minister, because he's an education envoy for the United Nations, so he's sometimes in there. And there are just people wandering around, even around this part of Manhattan. You'll go in and get a quick cup of coffee, and you'll be sat next to somebody incredibly important. They're just sort of, chatting. You can just,
or
it just
they're
means you
sat
get
next
access.
to you, James.
Well, no, but it just means you get access. You can get to talk, bump into people and talk, and that's why this madness, and it is madness, works.
Yeah, my only equivalent was going to the COP26 climate change conference in Glasgow, which of course is a UN conference. And the second you walked in there, it felt very different from any kind of domestic political event or even like an EU summit. The UN just feels very, very different for all the reasons you just explained.
Adam, as you will know well for your long experience and expertise in Brussels, it's very different to a fisheries council in Luxembourg.
Oh yes. Although I'll tell you which one I'd rather be at right now. Caitriona, I know you've got to go, so just quickly before you do, the other big event that was happening in the US in the last 24 hours, or maybe slightly longer than that now, was the funeral for Charlie Kirk, the big MAGA influencer who was shot and killed at an event at a university a couple of weeks ago. And if people saw this funeral at the corner of their eye, they might be confused thinking that actually they were watching something a bit more like the Super Bowl. It was a huge, big, celebratory thing in a stadium.
Yeah, it was technically a memorial, and I will say that is how Americans kind of commemorate someone who's died, whether they're someone like Charlie Kirk or just, a person who doesn't have 8 million followers. It's very different to how well we do it in Ireland and in the UK as well. There are these big gatherings, and as many people as want to will make a speech about the person who's deceased and remember them and tell funny stories, and it can last for hours, even for, sort of like, in inverted commas, ordinary people. In this case, of course, you had a celebrity Rolodex really from the MAGA world, including the president and the vice president and many, many members of the cabinet. And they all spoke about Charlie Kirk and their personal memories of him as well. But it also was a bit of a call to arms in a way. His widow, Erica Kirk, described it as a revival and, sort of said that this was Charlie Kirk's legacy, that in passing he had revived the movement and brought all these extra followers. So she spoke very kind of passionately about that. She also said, which was a very moving part, looking up to heaven as if she were speaking to her late husband, saying, "I forgive the gunman. And, let's all talk and debate together and move on from here." You contrast that to President Trump, who said, "I know Charlie would be very angry with me, but I hate my opponents and I'm not going to move beyond that." So a real contrast in approaches, especially given the conversation that we've been having here in the last 2 weeks and actually for months before that about the incendiary language that's being used in politics and this kind of politically violent rhetoric and how unfortunately that is spilling out into real life. So you had the two views of that just within one memorial service.
Caitriona, thank you very much. I'm going to let you go and do some more hobnobbing with diplomats and dignitaries.
And sandwich queuing?
Yes, next to VIPs though. It's not any old sandwich queue.
Yeah.
And James, just while Caitriona unplugs her earpiece and then goes off and hobnobs, for younger newscasters, explain what a Rolodex actually is. And I'm sure you used to have a very good one when you were at the Times.
Okay, a Rolodex is a system of storing contact numbers and what we used to call addresses, where we used to write each other notes on a piece of paper, and we'd fold that piece of paper in half and we'd put it in something called an envelope, and that envelope would have something called an address.
Oh, thanks,
so Mr.
Grandad.
Smith, number one,
Thanks.
the Larches. And we would then put something called a postage stamp, which we'd buy from a shop.
Okay, we get the
office,
idea. We get
and
the
we'd lick up
idea.
and we'd put on it. And the Rolodex basically was where you found your address. But the great thing about it is you could take the card out, write something on it, and then pop it on, and it was all alphabetical, so you could sort of scroll through it.
And Caitriona's still there, I hear.
Well, I am, because this is my live point for my next hit.
Oh,
so
I
it's
see.
not really me that
Okay.
has to go,
So
it's
actually,
James.
it's James and I have to go. Okay, fine. James and I will go
get
and
a sharp elbow.
don't worry. James and I will go and update our Rolodexes. So thank you very much to you two.
Thanks.
Talk soon.
Now, the other big news story in UK domestic politics today was Reform UK unveiling their new policy for the bit of the immigration system called indefinite leave to remain. This is this immigration status, which is just short of British citizenship, that a person can get if they've come to the UK and stayed here for 5 years. It's becoming a bit of a political hot potato because some of the other political parties are talking about how they would tweak eligibility for it. But today, Nigel Farage went the whole hog and he said he would remove it from the immigration system altogether. This is a decision that would affect hundreds of thousands of people currently in the UK. And Reform UK say it would apply to people here who are here now with that status now, not just people who come in future and try to obtain it. So I've been discussing that story with Vicki Young, fresh off the first edition of the newly revamped Politics Live on BBC Two this lunchtime.
Hello.
How was the first of the new Politics Live?
It was very exciting, very different vibe, and not just the set. We've got a sofa, but we don't want them to be too comfortable, so we still ask some difficult questions, and then a bit more like getting the views from viewers as well, so that's quite good because then you can get a comment from someone and put that to the politicians. So it's a direct way for people to challenge the politicians that we have in front of us.
And not to be superficial, as he then says something quite superficial, I do love your US late night talk show host style desk.
I love the desk. I know. I feel like I'm in a very good position there.
It's funny you say it because I always just think when whenever I filled in for Joko on Politics Live, the old version of it, when you're in the middle with two politicians either side, you turn your head to see the argument that's happening to your right, which means you can't see the reactions of the people to your left, but people at home can see.
That's true. That was a bit strange. It was a massive table as well, so
which I quite liked. I quite liked a big table.
The studio feels it actually feels bigger, and then it's all robotic cameras. So obviously the strange thing with that is, they start moving on their own, which is all a bit strange.
Hopefully not robotic politicians.
No, definitely not. No, we don't have them. Don't have them on our programme.
Right, let's get down to a real issue of substance then. So indefinite leave to remain and reforms plan to reform the whole thing, which is a massive category of immigration in the UK. Yeah,
that's right, because at the moment you can have temporary leave to remain here. Then you have indefinite leave to remain, which then can lead to citizenship if you want it to. And what they've decided to do is to basically scrap it altogether. And then the particularly controversial part of this, which of course a lot of their opponents are seizing on, is the fact that it will apply to those already here. It is retrospective in many ways. So there will be people in this country who have been here for a long time. They might have children. They might have been working here for a long time. But actually, they are also going to have to reapply. And you might be able to stay, but there will be different challenges around that. There will be different criteria. There will be tougher rules in terms of English language, in terms of your salary. And so you will have to reapply, I think, every 5 years. So that really changes the fundamental system that we currently have. It would be a huge shake-up. And, of course, political opponents are saying that it's not workable. But, reform absolutely saying and acknowledging that it's a big, big change. But they said it's what's needed.
And indefinite leave to remain is basically, it's the status you get after you've been in the UK for 5 years, no matter which kind of immigration route you took here. If you've been here for 5 years, you then basically get this status. And okay, it's not British citizenship, but it does give you access to the benefit system, the NHS, working, studying, pretty much everything you get from being a British citizen.
Yeah, I think the one thing with citizenship is you can vote. Is that right? I think that might be one of the differences. But yeah, so this is not about the people who've come here with, under the EU status. So it is the non-EU who've come here under that. Now, there are plans already being brought in by the government to actually change the indefinite leave to remain, that you have to be here for 5 years, you can apply for that. They're already talking about changing that to 10 years. So there's already the other parties moving along that route, but this is a completely different kind of category. This is saying, no, you're not gonna have that anymore. It's gonna go completely.
Yeah. So basically, the existing group of people here, which is like hundreds of thousands on indefinite leave to remain, would sort of, under a reform government, instantly get checked to see if they met the new thresholds to be here. So higher salaries, higher qualifications, not having used the benefit system. So you could have quite a lot of people who are here with indefinite leave to remain now being told to go.
Yeah.
And then the people that did have this new status would have to reapply every 5 years. And so, of course, if they didn't meet those criteria, they would also then be told to go.
Yeah. And so, of course, the questions then which unfold from that are, if you've got people who have been here for a very long time and they have themselves had children who are British and have only ever lived here, what happens to them? What are we saying about that? Now, on the programme, we had the chairman of Reform, David Bull, and
Dr. David Bull.
Dr. David Bull. And, I said to him, well, this is the thing. It's you're talking about retrospectively taking away the right of people who came here legally and have been told they have a legitimate right to remain in this country. A lot of them would have passed the Life in UK test. They would have passed a language test. They'll have paid potentially £5,000 in fees, maybe a lot more, and, had previously been told that they've got permanent status. And now they're unravelling that. Now, it was interesting because he wanted to concentrate more on those who came here and his term under the Boris wave. So that was the other really striking thing today on the programme, is that at every opportunity, Reform UK want to use the term Boris wave, and they are talking about the 3.8 million people who came here following Brexit when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister under a new point system. And so the point they're making is that those people have almost been here for 5 years. So under the current system, they would be able to start applying for indefinite leave to remain. So they're saying that will be a huge number of people. Now, of course, you don't know how many would apply. Some will have left already. You know, it's very complicated, isn't it? But he wanted to concentrate on that, whereas actually, yes, as you point out, the really actually controversial bit is that these are people who have potentially been here for a long time.
Right, so that's how Dr. David Bowe was talking about it on Vicky's programme. Let's hear how Nigel Farage, the leader of Reform UK, was talking about it at his regular Monday news conference.
The anticipated cost of the 800,000 plus who will qualify for indefinite leave to remain over the course of the next 3 to 4 years, the anticipated cost of this group of people is a staggering £230 billion. It is absolutely an eye-watering sum of money. We will not only say that these people do not qualify for indefinite leave to remain, we will abolish indefinite leave to remain as a category in this country.
And then, Vicky, what do reform types say about the fact, well, actually, quite a lot of the people that came in what they call the Boris wave were here on, for example, the health and social care visa because there were lots of vacancies that needed filled in health and social care. And so actually there's lots of bits of the economy or public services that rely on people who either come here on a visa or are here because they've got indefinite leave to remain.
Yes. So again, they obviously that's one of the first things that a Reform UK politician is always asked about this, because there are huge numbers who are, some would say, propping up a lot of our services. Now, they say that they do recognise that. They are going to have some other kind of visas for people. Now, they call some of them investor routes. They call them acute skills shortage visas. Now, we've heard this before, haven't we, about the skills shortage visas. But they are also saying, look, you've got to encourage British people here to get back to work if they're not in work. And they're saying that if companies hire a person from abroad, they have to train someone at home. So that's their argument. They're saying there are plenty of people who are here who can do that work, and effectively they've got to be made to do it. And that's how they think that gap can be filled.
And Reform reckon they can save £234 billion from,
yes,
well, the public finances in general, which is being massively disputed by Labour. Here is the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves.
The numbers that Reform have come out with overnight have already begun to disassemble. And I want to bring down illegal migration. This government is bringing down migration. We have sent a record number of people who've got no right to be in our country home. We're reducing the use of hotels for asylum seekers, and we've made an agreement with France to send people back who come over on small boats. Those are all steps towards our ambitions to get a grip of this situation that we inherited.
Yeah, so the savings that Reform are touting do actually look a little bit shaky.
Yeah, well, I mean, Nigel Farage says that he thinks actually that figure's too low, and he thinks it actually would be higher. Now, I think the problem they have is that the numbers are partly based on a Centre for Policy Studies numbers and work that they've done, and they have since changed those a bit and said actually that their figures should no longer be used because their figures were challenged by the Office for Budget Responsibility. So I think that is the problem that they have. You know, they are accused quite a lot, aren't they, Reform UK, of having numbers that don't add up. But, you know, Nigel Farage, you know, as ever with his style, and he said, no, actually, I think it could be a lot more than that. And he claims that there's a lot of holes in the data around this, around people who are on indefinite leave to remain here or have been here and about to apply. He says there aren't that many figures or accurate figures about exactly what benefits they will be claiming, although, you know, he says a lot of them are claiming benefits.
Right, let's drill into some of the numbers in a bit more detail, because I've been doing that with Ben Chu from BBC Verify. And Ben Chu is here. Hello, Ben.
Hello, Adam.
Right, first of all, indefinite leave to remain, ILR. How many indefinitely leaving remaining people are there?
Well, look, I think there's no doubt that this reform policy would affect a lot of people. The exact numbers are a bit uncertain, but it's definitely a lot of people. So if you just look at the number of people who applied for and got indefinite leave for remain in the most recent year, so that's the year to June, it was about 163,000 people. That's non-EU citizens were granted it. So that's the kind of the ballpark figure, the context you're talking about of the number of people getting it every year. And that has been rising since 2017, although it was actually higher back in 2010, 2011. But of course, we've had a large wave of migration in recent years. So there's a lot of people in the country who might be expected to go on to claim indefinite leave to remain. So the Migration Observatory think tank estimates there are about 2.1 million people who are currently in the country on temporary visas who have what they call a pathway to settlement. So we don't know if they would apply or they would have applied, but they could potentially go on from the visas they're on under the current system to claim indefinite leave for remain.
And yeah, I suppose that's the tricky thing about working out what's going to happen in the future, because you can't know the intentions of every single person. Because people don't, there's a sort of idea that people come to Britain and then stay forever, but actually lots of people do leave again.
Yeah, and we should also talk about the people who've been granted it, because don't forget, Reform are talking about taking it away from people who've been granted it.
Basically, what statisticians would call the stock.
Yes, the stock.
Group
what
of people,
is the stock? Now, in terms of, there's a lot of people who got indefinite leave to remain who were from the EU after Brexit. It's about 4 million people in that category. Now, Reform have clarified today at the press conference that they would not have their leave taken away. So we can take the EU contingent.
Well, and also this takes me back to Brexit, because I watched the development of that in minute detail at the time. And yeah, they created this new thing called settled status. Yeah. But actually, it was only called settled status. It was actually indefinite leave to remain,
exactly,
really, wasn't it?
Yeah, so I think that's a really important clarification. There's probably a lot of people who are very concerned seeing those headlines and understanding that they have indefinite leave to remain. But Reform have said today they wouldn't be affected. But there are people who are non-EU who have been granted that status. And again, the Oxford Migration Observatory estimates at the end of last year, 2024, there were about 430,000 people with that status who, if Reform came in and implemented this, could potentially see that status taken away and forced to go into this new system. So, look, it's certainly in the hundreds of thousands of people who would definitely be affected if Reform came in.
And I suppose beyond the individual numbers, it's that hundreds of thousands thing to kind of keep in your head when you're thinking about this.
Yes, I don't think we should be too exact about this, because as you've mentioned, we just don't know what people would and would not have done in future. But it's a large policy affecting a lot of people. And speaking of large numbers, we should probably talk about the savings.
Yes, perfect segue. So Nigel Farage claims this will save the public finances in a very kind of broad sense, £234 billion. What are these savings he thinks he's talking about there?
Well, he's arguing based on a think tank report, which was the Centre for Policy Studies, who did some number crunching and some estimates around it, looking at how much the people who would get indefinite leave to remain would end up costing the state over their lifetime. So not just any given year, but over their whole lifetimes. And they estimated that there would be a big net fiscal cost of all these people if they went on to claim indefinite leave to remain. And that's where that figure comes from. But very important to point out that the Centre for Policy Studies have since withdrawn that figure. They've said we'll put a new figure out, but we're not standing by. But Reform have taken it. Look, speaking to labour market experts who are looking at how that estimate was arrived at and the actual numbers of what recent migrants to the UK are earning and could reasonably be expected to continue earning over their lifetimes, they don't think it's a credible figure that you'd get all those net fiscal costs going away. In fact, you may even have it's not a saving to the taxpayer, it's a cost to the taxpayer of this policy. These are very uncertain numbers. We can't be sure, but be very, very wary of that £234 billion saving figure from Reform.
Yeah, so that was Ben Chu's take on the numbers with his giant spreadsheet, which he loves to put on big screens on BBC Verify every day. Vicki, just some closing thoughts from you then, having had a good 45 minutes chewing over this story with lots of politicians today. Yeah, New Look Politics Live.
Yeah, the interesting thing was that the other political opponents of Reform UK on the panel, they were saying, look, it's probably unworkable. So the Labour politicians saying it's unworkable, and yes, I'm against it. And the Conservatives as well saying, yes, it probably won't work. They weren't as maybe full-throated in opposition as I was expecting them to be, because they don't want to be sitting there, it seems to me, talking about that the levels of legal migration, because that's what we're talking about here, they don't want to be saying that those levels are okay. I mean, James Cleverly, who's on the panel, said he brought in loads of changes which really brought down the numbers of legal migration, which is true. And Labour have kept a lot of those changes. But it was interesting because the Liberal Democrat conference is going on, we did have the Lib Dem MP join us, and they were being much more vociferous about it in opposition, saying a lot of these people you're talking about effectively throwing out the country are our friends, our neighbours who have made a life here and have been here for a long time and they have been contributing, and you're trying to deport them. That's the word that Reform UK use, when actually they've done nothing wrong.
Yeah, and I was just going to echo two of those things in my final thoughts, having now thought about this story for a few hours now. And it's very similar to what you're just saying there. Number one, focus. This is now moving focus onto legal migration. So people who've come here for work or study or because they've got other family members here and they've come under the existing system. And actually all this last few months and last few years, the focus on the small boats arrivals has been on what some people call irregular migration or some people call illegal migration. This is the other type, which is actually much, 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 much bigger and also is under much more control of the government because the government decides what visas to issue and what the immigration rules are. So Reform UK are successfully moving the spotlight onto that now. And it's quite an amorphous thing. And the second thing I was going to say was about that D word, deportation. So every time I say deportation on air, well, not every time, but a fair few times, we all then get an email from Dominic Casciani going, guys,
it's
deportation is for foreign criminals who are being deported back to the country so they can be imprisoned there. When it comes to immigration cases, as you said, it's removals. But Reform call that deportations as well. And it's now creeping into everyone's language that every kind of removal or taking somebody out of the country is a deportation. So they're successfully kind of rewriting the words that are used in the conversation. And it reminds me back at the very start of COVID, where I always pushed against the word lockdown. And the government did a bit as well because they thought it sounded too scary. And it's because actually there was lots of different options for what a lockdown could be. And so I thought, well, it's better to just talk about the restrictions that exist. But I lost that battle and lockdown became the word. And that's another example of where our language got rewritten because there was just momentum behind a word.
Yeah, and you're right. It's interesting whether Conservatives and the government, whether they talk in those terms or whether they are careful with their language.
Yeah. And again, illegal migration or irregular migration.
Yeah.
Yeah. Vicki, thank you very much and congratulations again on a successful first New Politics Live. Although not the first ever Politics Live. You've done loads.
Yes.
So I'm treating you like the new girl. It's like you did it for ages
I've been around a long time, madam.